In the late 1800s, Brockton was booming. Its successful shoe manufacturing industry had created a prosperous city with a stable, healthy economy. Brockton had a reputation for innovative public works, such as inland sewer disposal systems and grade crossings for railway lines. All of these circumstances led Thomas Edison and his chief engineer, Frank Sprague, to choose Brockton as the site for the construction of a small electric power generating station. By August of 1883, the one-story brick and granite building was completed. Machinery and equipment were installed and tested. On October 1st, 1883, Thomas Edison threw the switch, giving Brockton the distinction of having the first electric generating station to use a 3-wire underground system. The original central power station and 3 subsequent additions remain today on the corner lot of Montello and Lincoln Streets. Architecturally, they represent late 19th and early 20th century industrial design and construction.
We were looking around for additional office space, and this was available, and the council decided, well, this might be a real good opportunity to do a couple things. One, to provide for a long-term home for the council, and also to support the city of Brockton's efforts to revitalize the downtown and to rehabilitate a significant building across from City Hall. I can recall the building in its dilapidated condition with billboards outside and really a nesting place for pigeons. We basically bought a shell of a building that was in desperate need of rehabilitation and restoration, and a lot of the brickwork was deteriorated. The windows that were in place were rotted and falling out, in fact. So the building was in really desperate condition in those days.
This type of project is more difficult than new construction. In other words, when new construction, you come out of the ground and everything is made to fit neatly together, and it just runs, very smooth and easy. You're dealing with, all new components. And also, there's less opportunity of surprises.
Structurally, actually, it was pretty good. The only real problems were with the brickwork, because the brick had deteriorated quite a bit, especially around the chimney areas. Everything had to match exactly what was there. We had to have the mortar tested and analyzed, and they told us what the chemical composition was. We had to take that and recreate that. So the exact same mortar mix had to go back in that was pulled out. Everything is very strict that way, and the brick had to match exactly.
Buying new bricks to fit in is very, very difficult. We were able to find something that was, very, very similar, and the mason tried to go and by hand blend them as much as he could and get them to, to look slightly weathered so that they would be a little less obtrusive. In time, those will weather in, and so 5 years from now, I doubt if you'd ever know that there was any patch.
That whole process of dealing with the historical commission and getting approvals, sometimes that takes about as much work as the design itself and doing the working drawings. You have to document everything and document what was there to begin with. For starters, we had to draw the old windows and submit them. And it turned out that they were an industrial window that you don't see anymore. And, most people would have thought it was just a plain old window. So then we had to recreate that, and everything has to be approved. The window details, it has to look exactly like the old window that you're pulling out.
Do a lot of historical work. That's one of the things we do best. Most of the older buildings are authentic divided light sash, which means that the lights in the window are divided by what they call Muntenbys. We still make the old 5/8 Muntenby. That's the width of the by, which is what these historical people want. As far as the number of people involved, there's probably 50, 60 people involved. If you figure everybody along the line in manufacturing, in their different little departments. That's about right, 50 to 60 people involved in processing an order.
We had this big open masonry building, and we were allowed to leave all the brick exposed, so we wanted to do something that would offset that, make it a little more interesting. And Dan actually came up with the idea of like an interior cityscape. What developed was, you know, the little gables and arches and things like that. So that was fun. You usually don't get to do something that's quite that constructive inside.
The inside is just, you know, beautifully done, and it's a pleasure to work. I think it's really increased the morale of the council staff in a sense that they're proud of the building and our offices, and really take a lot of pleasure in showing people around.
What we did there was called adaptive reuse. We didn't recreate an electrical plant because there was no need for that anymore. What we did was we put in offices and made it a workspace, which there was a need for in that area. But there was no need to tear the building down. I mean, it's very suitable, and it's almost more interesting because it had a past life and a past use.
For all of us to get together as a team and turn that building into a usable space is what it's all about. And I think that I can speak for all the subcontractors too, that we enjoyed doing it, and it was successful. From what we know, Old Colony has enjoyed using it, and that's what it's all about. That's really what our job is to take that and make it into the space that they need.
Now it's really exciting to come to work. I mean, the building is really attractive from the outside. It's really different in the sense that it has a smokestack on the building, which it's been capped and has no functional use, but it's a nice architectural feature. The brickwork is certainly beautiful and beautifully restored. It's an exciting place, and we all enjoy it. It's quite nice.
In the early days of New England, there were many windmills in use, particularly on the shores of Boston Harbor, Cape Cod, and the islands. Harnessing the power of the wind, the mills ground corn into cornmeal, which was used to make brown bread, hasty pudding, and johnny cakes. Cornmeal was a staple of early Americans' diet. The coming of the railroad changed all this. Wheat, already milled, came from the west. The wind-driven grist mill, once indispensable, quickly became a thing of the past. The Chatham Windmill is significant as one of the few surviving wind-powered grist mills in operating condition. Originally, the Chatham Mill stood at Crocker Rise, or what became known as Mill Hill, overlooking Stage Harbor. Sailors used it as a point of navigation. The windmill was built by Colonel Benjamin Godfrey in 1797, whose family continued to own it until the end of the Civil War. The mill passed hands several times, but remained in use until a gale storm in 1907 destroyed the top of the shaft and arms. Within a year's time, it was again in use and remained so until 1916. The windmill was donated to the town of Chatham in 1955. At that time, it was moved to its present site at Chase Park, where it continues to weather Cape Cod gales.
The windmill is one of our unique landmarks here in town. We get visitors to Chatham through our local hotel, motel operations in town, and just general visitors to the Cape anyways. The windmill is a landmark that they want to come visit and take a look at. My responsibilities as park superintendent also include that of the windmill, both in the maintenance of the mill and the interpretive program that we run there during the summers. Early on, the Park Commission and myself both felt that the experience was not going to be complete on the mill unless we got it back to operational form. It was important to take it all the way, make the mill completely operational, give the visitors locally and from abroad the unique experience that you get when the mill's actually running and the building is kind of creaking and the whole place just comes to life.
We were pretty secure in knowing that the work required a focus on the working parts of the windmill, on what we call the machinery. So the goal for us with this project was to get the mill in operation, to grind corn, to exhibit to the public a working windmill. The Chatham Windmill involved finding specialists that could work on the windmill on many different areas. The skills are extremely important, together with a kind of an attitude, an approach that a craftsman would take, which I think has to do with respecting the materials, respecting the history of the building.
I work in residential construction and build post and beam houses for my main job, main source of income. And whenever one of these jobs come along, I'm quite available for it. The wind shaft is the key. Once you have that and you invested the money in it, you don't want to let it sit around for years and years and years without using it. It's too valuable a piece of wood, and it is the major component, well, one of the major components up here. I hired a friend of mine there, Hudson Baxter, who lives in Hyannis. He's a Baxter Crane and Welding. I said, Hudson, could you like to come up and put a wind shaft in for me for the Chatham Mill? He said he'd be delighted to. He picked the wind shaft up. We put taglines on it and put a tagline inside the building here with one of my carpenters just pulling on it to keep the tail end of the wind shaft coming in through the opening here. And I would have liked to have been in here to see the end of this big piece of wood come through that hole there. It went in there as slick as could be. The key to the vanes is picking some nice straight pieces of wood for the whip, it's called. That's the main piece of it. And after you see the mill run, you understand why it's called a whip, because it does whip around pretty good. Making a sail is one of the most time-consuming jobs in the whole windmill process. Each one takes about an hour. When you look at what you've done, you go, there's got to be an easier way to do this. That's the third set of vanes I made, and there's no easier way to do it, because I've been thinking about it for a long time.
I started 12 years ago, and I made sails and boat canvas, but mostly repairing sails is my favorite. On the few times that I've gotten canvas sails in my shop, there have been 3 or 4. It's unusual because most sails are made out of Dacron now. So I had a very good look at them to see how they were made, and when I was asked to make the windmill sails, I tried to keep that in mind. I like doing projects that are a challenge. I had never seen any windmill sails before, and I had to stop and think every time I did anything how they would have done it then, and how, with the materials that I have now, I could try my best to duplicate what they would have done.
A millwright is a man, I suppose, or a woman for that matter, who can build mills, dress millstones, and generally repair any sort of mill machinery. I was born in England in 1926, right next door to a water mill. I've now worked in mills for 52 years. But I guess I came to Cape Cod to do some work about 10 years ago. In that time, I've dressed millstones at 4 mills on the Cape. Well, these stones here, I believe, came from Quincy in Massachusetts. And these are a granite stone. And I suppose this top millstone weighs about 3,000 pounds. And the bottom one also. I dressed these in December 1989. So I was here for 3 days doing them. This is the main tool. The chisel is the mill bill, and the handle is the bill thrift. Make millions of taps all around the stones and recut the pattern in and sharpen the stones. Called millstone dressing. Now, after we've dressed the millstones, we have to test for accuracy, and this is called a paint staff. So we make sure this is perfectly true and level, and then we put some, usually red oxide and water, and make a sort of a paint on it, and rub it round the stones, and it marks all the high spots. And round the centre of the stones, we want it slightly lower so that the grain will get in between the stones and then get ground finer round the outside, which is called the skirt of the stone. So in the case of Chatham Mill, possibly be able to grind 2,000 bushels of grain before they need to have the millstones dressed again. So since they don't do very much, it might be a number of years before they want them.
We spent about 50 man-days on various and sundry projects in the mill, and scaffolds and supplying certain materials and talking to certain suppliers and chasing things down, basically. I mean, that's a major part of a job like this. So altogether, it gave us a good solid month of work, I would think.
I like it.
It was a nice boost to our economy down there. The men liked it. If they had their way, they'd work on windmills for nothing. This is an amazing machine. Everything in here is adjustable and made to be replaced. And that's the beauty of this machine. You can replace this piece here, the teeth are easy to pop one out. And you know, the miller, when there was no wind, still had something to do. I mean, his wife would kick him out of the house, I'm sure. Says, go work on the windmill, would you please? He'd come in here and make some new teeth, I would imagine, or fix this or true this up.
I think that the preservation of the windmills is most important because there's so many of them gone and there's only these few left. And if these are not preserved, they'll be gone forever. It'll be a way of life and also a facet of engineering which will be lost too. So if they don't preserve these we've got, they will be lost. So it's very important.
Sometimes we tear down things that are irreplaceable, and you're never going to make another 200-year-old windmill. This is a history of our country. This is what your forebears did. They made it, and they worked it, and they operated as part of the community. Every person in the community was probably touched by this windmill. This mill fed how many people? You know, who knows? Thousands, I'm sure, over a course of 200 years. While you're working, you don't think too much about how you feel. You're trying to do the job and trying to keep the crew safe. You're here and you're happy you got the job. It's later on when you're finished that you walk in by yourself in one of these 200-year-old buildings. And it's pretty neat. You know, you feel like you got something to accomplish and a little bit special.
Located in the village of Deerfield on the west bank of the Connecticut River, historic Deerfield is a museum of early American life. The Hinsdale and Anna Williams House is historic Deerfield's 12th museum building. In the early 1800s, Williams, one of the wealthiest men in the region, undertook major alterations in the building. Through the careful restoration work of many people, the Hinsdale and Anna Williams House has been restored to its early 19th century splendor.
Federal style of architecture in the Connecticut River Valley really began to be seen in the late 18th century, in the second half of the 1790s. What we see in this house is a number of details that E.H. Williams specifically put into the house because they were in the latest style, the neoclassical style. Certainly the front door surround with the fan light that's gilded and the side lights is one of the details that you would have expected to have if you wanted a high-style house in this rural area.
Hinsdale Williams wanted to have a different kind of house to signal to his neighbors that he was not one of those old kind of farmers, but he was a new, modern kind of farmer. And in particular, he was very interested in stall-fed oxen, where they would take young oxen from the hill towns down to the valley town of Deerfield, fatten them up, and then drive them into Boston. He brought about massive changes in the house. And as we have discovered archaeologically, bringing in lots and lots of fill to create a very manicured landscape on which to present this new image of the person that lives in this house.
Before preservation work gets done, it's best to have the archaeologists get in there as early as possible in the process so that we can help to guide some of the preservation work with the results of what we're finding, and so that we can find the archaeological properties and archaeological resources undisturbed by the preservation work.
Well, we found a number of things at the Ebenezer Hinsdale Williams site to help in the restoration effort. We've got some of the creamware plates, a glass tumbler, and bits and pieces of an annular pitcher. So some of the things that we found have helped in trying to understand what the landscape around the house looked like, and some of the things that we found have helped them better understand how to make the inside landscape of the house be more realistic and true to the 1830s.
The first grant from the Massachusetts Historical Commission was really quite crucial, and in that case, we were able to engage an outside contractor to pursue the specifications that Bill Flint had drawn up and get a lot of work done in 1 year.
We were awarded a grant to help us to do two things. One, to stabilize the yellow of the house. One of the foundation walls was bulged in quite noticeably, and we felt that over time it was going to collapse in, and so that was part of the grant, as well as doing the sill work on the L. And the second phase was to re-roof the house. What we wanted to do after opening up a section of the roof was to put it back to the way it was in the period 1817 to 1838. We applied to the Mass Historical Commission for a grant to help us both conserve the wallpaper in the north parlor and the fireboard that went with it, along with a fireboard that we found in the attic that went to another fireplace in the house, as well as to conduct paint analysis in the rooms of the house, so that when we got to the point of redoing the interior finishes, we would have a clear sense of what the colors were that E.H. Williams put on.
We could tell by looking at it that there had been a great deal that had happened to it, and Bill Flint from Deerfield was able to explain to us that the wallpaper had been through the major flood of the Connecticut River, which had put water up to about, as I remember, about 4 or 5 feet, and also had submerged both of the fire screens that we also treated.
The transformation of the paper actually visually was, of course it's satisfying, but it isn't a large transformation. We weren't necessarily attempting to do that. Our goal in treating this paper was to stabilize it. In other words, where paper had come off the wall or where paint was cleaving away from the paper, we would re-adhere it, reattach the paper, reattach the paint, and attempt to stabilize the paint as best we can.
Many of the changes are very subtle, but we also realize that a number of very subtle changes put together make a whole room look dramatically different.
The ultimate idea is that you should be able to walk into the room, see and feel the way this wallpaper affects the space, and just say, I know this room is old, but it looks like it's been well cared for.
Oh, the scenic wallpapers are so marvelous, and you have to remember that people who lived in the early 19th century, 1810, 1820, didn't have television, they didn't have radio, but just putting this panorama in a room opened up a tremendous amount of pattern, just kind of an exciting visual experience.
It tells us that he was successful and worldly, in the sense that he was knowledgeable about world taste. And clearly it was an important paper to him. It's in the front parlor. It's probably the room where he would receive his guests. So he was clearly interested in showing off his good taste and impressing his friends. And I think it's still impressive even today.
When I'm sampling a room, it never does just to cut into the paint layers at one place. I have to do it at many places along a given run of molding, chair rail, baseboard, cornice molding, to make sure that I'm seeing the same paint layers in the same sequence. I have to dig and dig and dig, And after I've done all the digging, I have to then come back to the microscope, look carefully at cross sections and exposed layers. But all the time I'm doing that, I feel as if I'm really finding out something about the people who put that paint on. My main aim was to find the paint layers that would reveal the colors and finishes of the 1816 to 1838 period of the house. Very seldom are houses from the 18th or 19th century painted in all the same color in all the rooms. I think people liked fiddling with those hand-mixed paint. The colors of paint that I found in the Hinsdale house told me that they were indeed keeping up with a somewhat higher style than many country people. They really did want to make it look up to the minute when they changed it, but they were not avant-garde in any way. The colors for the period to which the house is restored are really rather neutral and rather subdued. The wallpapers were the important decorative element on the walls of the rooms, more than the trim paint colors. The paint really was a contributing part of the whole decorative picture of the house. It contributed to the wallpaper, the design of the architectural elements, and then, of course, the furnishings. In the Hinsdale Williams house, paint was part of a total picture.
The reason for going to all this trouble and detail and expense is to make history and the lessons of history and lifestyle and technology and design and all sorts of things more available to the general public. There aren't many of us who would choose to go back to school or be a junior in high school and go to whatever period has American history. I mean, at age 40, I don't feel like doing that anymore. But I do feel like taking objects, putting them into a recreated, accurate environment, and using a house like this as a text to teach about history and culture.
We always wish that we knew more about houses. We sometimes wish that the people who lived here, who sat and slept in these rooms, the people who walked along the street could come back and tell us everything we want to know. We always hope when we open the house up that if Hinsdale and Anna Williams ever came back, they'd know it was their house and not somebody else's.